Hello everybody, this is Mr. Storm, and in this video we're going to actually talk about how to write a core gameplay report, and I will actually show you an example, or not really show you, but explain to you an example of how these things are represented in a game that we've probably all played before, Super Mario Brothers. So let's get started. So your core gameplay report should give your reader a sense of what your game is going to be like. I should be able to read your core gameplay report and experience your game just by reading it, right? I should already be able to visualize what your game is going to be like just by reading your report. So there are a couple of components that are really important for a core gameplay report. The first are the core gameplay mechanics. What is the player doing in the game? You're going to use verbs for this, like running, jumping, racing, counting, puzzle solving, exploring, dungeon crawling, whatever, right? We want to explain, is it a single player game or a multiplayer game? Is it cooperative? Is it competitive? And you want to give as much detail as you can in this section. The more explicit that you can be here, the better your reader will understand your vision for the game. So, for example, a game like Super Mario Brothers, well, what is the player doing in the game? The player runs from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, avoiding traps and jumping on platforms. There are enemies in the game who, if Mario touches them, he will lose a life. When all of his lives are gone, he dies, and you have to start over from the last beginning of the last world. If he hits certain blocks, he could get power-ups such as coins. He could get a flower power, which allows him to shoot fireballs. He can get a star, which makes him invulnerable for a short period of time. And if he makes it all the way to the end of the level and he jumps on the flagpole, he has cleared that level and he will move on to the next level. After a certain amount of levels, a world has been completed, and at the end of the 8th world, he fights a boss. And when he defeats that boss, he rescues the princess. It is a single-player game, but you could also play with a friend as Luigi. It's cooperative in that mode, and then you're taking turns back and forth. So that's essentially what the core gameplay mechanics for Mario would be. So goals. What is the player trying to accomplish within the game? How do they win the game, right? What does he or she have to do to achieve that goal? What barriers or obstacles exist that make achieving the goal difficult? How can the player fail while playing the game? What kind of feedback does the player get on their progress toward that goal? Is the player rewarded when the goal is achieved? Things like that. So with Mario, the goal section of Mario would be his goal is to rescue the princess. In order to rescue the princess, he has to make it through a large number of levels, defeating enemies throughout the levels and avoiding obstacles that could hurt him, such as spikes, lava, endless, bottomless pits. In some levels, there are Goombas, which are mushroom-like enemies that if Mario touches them on the side, he dies, but if he jumps on them, he could squish them and make them, and basically kill them. There are Koopas, which are turtles, which if he jumps on them, it changes their state, where he can kick them, and then they become, you get the idea, right? There are tons of components in this game. There's the magic mushroom. Whenever he takes it, or takes the magic mushroom, whenever he hits the magic mushroom, he grows, right? So these are all goals and barriers and power-ups and stuff. You want to explain in detail how the goal is accomplished and what barriers exist to keep him from reaching the goal. Components. What kinds of things are there in the game? What kind of enemies, objects in the environment, power-up, points, etc.? What do they look like? What do they do? How does the player interact with them? You don't have to include art for these elements yet, but you do want to start coming up with art for these assets at some point, right? Any free time you have in class, maybe start developing some of these art assets, because you will need them at the end of the semester when you really build your game. So for example, in Mario, there are all kinds of components. So we have power-ups such as the mushroom, the flower power, and the star. We also have coins. If you reach 100 coins, then you get 1-up. There are 1-ups as well, physical 1-up collectibles that you can get. Those are green mushrooms. There are enemies in the game. There are Chupa Chups, which are, fish that can be flying as well. There are Koopas. There are Goombas. Bowser. There's a Bowser enemy at the end of each world castle. There are Dry Bones, which are basically skeleton Koopas. There are Bullet Bills. There are tons of enemies. Womps, right? Tons of enemies in Super Mario Brothers. Components are really... Oh, and components also include environmental traps as well, like spikes, or, in Mario, they have those lava whips that kind of go back and forth. You want to explain those as well. Controls. So how does the player control what happens in the game? What does pushing certain buttons on the controller do? Your games will be played on PC, but I will also write the scripts so that they can be played with a Nintendo controller, with either an NES controller or a Super Nintendo controller. If you have one with a USB interface, you can plug them in and play your game. And I have some that I'll have in the classroom. You guys can plug in and play with them. So you want to describe what the controls do. So when I push the A button, does it jump? Or does the A button actually let me run? Right? Explain what you want your controller to do. Now, your controls are going to be heavily based on the scripts that I write. So I will explain to you, once it's time to build our games, exactly what your control scheme will be for your game. But if you don't like that, I will also teach you in Unity how to change that around. So we'll do that. We'll talk about that at some point. And then the controls for like Mario is just whatever the control scheme is for Mario. So user experience. So when the player starts to play the game, what steps do they follow? What screens will they see? How are the levels in the game structured? How does the player move from one part of the game to the next? So you're going to want to use this section to wrap up all the overall details for the game. So with Mario Brothers, there's an open screen, there's a start screen, and if you press the start button, it allows you to go into to world 1-1. The worlds are numbered as, world 1 and then the stage. So there's a world and then stage. And there are a certain number of stages in a world. There are secret teleporting portals that you can find within a couple of the worlds that will teleport you. Within a couple of stages that will teleport you to specific worlds further on. So there are shortcuts you can make. All those kinds of details. You can pause the game. There is a timer for each stage, and as the timer runs down to 0, or if the timer runs down to 0, then the game is over. You've lost a life. You have to start over from the beginning of the stage. So those are all details you want to add into the user experience section. So hopefully this clarified a little bit on how to write a core gameplay report. There should be, a paragraph or two for each of these sections. This should be a pretty lengthy report. Now, the best part is the character sheet that you created last week and this core gameplay report, they're going to be used in next week's assignment, which is our power standard, where we write our game development document, which is a bigger report, but it also includes the things we've already written. So you're actually doing your power standard and an assignment at the same time. You're kind of double dipping, which is nice. Okay, so that's about it for me. Please remember that the games you're going to write about are 2D side-scrolling platformer games. So they can go from left to right, right to left. They can go from bottom to top to bottom, however you want. But they need to be platforming games with a character that jumps. And possibly a shooting mechanic. We'll see if we can throw that in there. But for the most part, it's going to be a platforming game. So plan for that when you're writing your core gameplay report. And then I will use these reports to kind of figure out what scripts that you guys need me to write. So make sure you do this and do this on time. So I have time to write your scripts. Okay, that's it for me. Please have fun with this. I know there's a lot of writing in the beginning of this class, but once we get through this, I guarantee you're going to have a lot of fun making the games. And you will see why this is important when it comes time to make your video game toward the end of the semester. Okay, I will see you later. Thanks for paying attention. Peace.